Good morning, Year 3. This is your Wednesday's English lesson where we are continuing with our story where our pair of friends who were at the theatre just heard some rumblings and they went outside and they saw the streets clogging up and all of that smoke. So we are going to be continuing today. We are going to be doing our 3 learning chunks again. And we're going to start actually by having a look at the same picture that we saw on Monday. But we're going to focus on what is kind of happening in the sky and kind of up above. So we've got 2 initiates. We are just going to start by focusing on the first one, which is our noticing. So what is happening to the sky? Now you can jot down everything you can notice, everything that you can see that is happening in that sky. You could choose metaphors if you'd like to, or you could just be really literal with what is going on. So in your first box, can you jot that down for me, please? Okay, so what's going on in the sky? There was thick dark cloud, the sky darkened, smoke kind of like drifted everywhere, all those kind of things that you could see. You can only see the outline of the birds as well, so maybe it was just super thick. It was just getting really, really heavy as it went across the sky. Okay, our next initiates. We're going to have a look at some prepositions. So these are where things happen or where something is. So could you please tell me, where is all of this thick dark cloud and the darkening happening? So jot that down in your second box, please. The ideas that I came up with, we've got above their heads, in the sky. So keeping it nice and simple, where are those things happening? We've got a nice prepositional phrase there that we can use in our learning chunk to describe everything we notice. Our model. The 2 children ran off hand in hand into the dusty streets. As they ran, above them, the sky darkened and a thick cloud began to appear over the city. So I haven't started with my prepositional phrase this time. We can drop them in anywhere within the sentence, and I thought I'd drop it in almost as a subordinate clause actually, because I could have taken it out and it would have still made sense. And then I have described everything that we could notice. I've started off not with the description and not with the with the preposition, sorry. I started off with something a little bit different to extend my writing to make it more interesting. So what were the children doing? So that's a nice action sentence that we could use to start off our sentence as well. So what I'd like you to do, you can borrow that as the children were running kind of thing, and then I'd like you to describe where and what was happening using that preposition phrase. I'm going to say 5 to 7 minutes for this learning chunk, please. Let's have a look at our second learning chunk. We are going to try and create a personification. Now, a personification is where we give something human features, and we are focusing on the clouds and the smoke and kind of what they're doing. So dust and smoke isn't a human thing, but we can give it human features, and we are going to do that through it being quite violent and what it's doing to the people. So the first thing I'd like you to collect in your first box is some violent verbs. So verbs are doing words. So what kind of thing can we think of that is a violent action? And jot those down in your third box, please. Right, so some violent verbs could be things like strangled or squashed or suffocated. They don't all have to begin with an S. That is just purely coincidence. We could have kicked, we could have punched. But when I'm thinking about what the dust is doing, what the ash cloud is doing, it's not really punching or kicking you. For me, it's the idea that it's kind of like containing itself and it's really pushing down on you. So that's why I've used those violent verbs. So this is what the ash cloud is doing. It's strangling, it's squashing, it's suffocating. But we also want to think about the idea that it's covering you. And the covering is why it is strangling, suffocating or squashing you. So I'd like you to think of some nouns that kind of give you cover. So a noun is a thing that you might put around you or on you to cover you. I don't want things like jumpers though, because jumpers are normally quite a positive thing. When I put a jumper on, I don't necessarily think of being like strangled or squashed. So it doesn't have to be a positive thing, maybe a negative idea or something that is quite neutral in general. So it's a bit of a tricky one. So have a go at just thinking of some things, some nouns that use to cover things, and pop that in your fourth box for me. Right, so I've got things like duvets, blankets, and curtains. Now, I've kind of contradicted myself there because I've said not positive things. For me, a duvet and a blanket is quite a nice thing. That's kind of like things that I sit on the sofa with or in bed and you warm up and you're nice and warm. A curtain, however, I would never think of putting a curtain over me. So that might be the kind of ones that I think about using. So it's really important to think about the vocabulary that you are choosing in this learning chunk to create this personification. So I'm going to give you an example of how you can create it. It became difficult to breathe. The air filled with ash that got into their mouths and eyes. The grey fog strangled the sun. Ash rained from the sky, covering the buildings with its silver blanket. So I've used those two ideas separately. You can bring them together. You can talk about the fact that the ash cloud blanketed the pair, strangling them. You can do something like that as well. But I've talked about the fact the fog strangled the sun. It took out the sight, and also the ash cloud kind of like covered the buildings with its blanket, so it completely covered them. You couldn't see in front of you, those kind of things. So personifications are a really tricky thing, but we're going to give them a go. So this is where you are creating something that doesn't have human features and giving it human features. The fog can't strangle, and ash cloud can't cover things like a blanket, but we're giving them features to kind of make them seem more real, seem more human, and a little bit scarier as well. So talk about the fact that the cloud was starting to appear, and maybe talk about the fact that it was in your mouth, and then use a personification to describe the effect of the ash cloud, please. This is a tricky one, so I think probably 10 minutes to give this a go for me, please. Let's have a look at our next picture for our learning chunks. So this is where we are focusing on next. We can now finally see that it is Mount Vesuvius that has erupted in the background. I'm sure we probably all thought it was anyway, but we're seeing that really for the first time now, and this is what has happened. It has erupted. It's you can see all the lava spewing out the top, but more importantly, we've got all of these people, and you can really see the fear on their face, and they are running. They are trying as fast as they can to get away from the volcano. Now, as we know, most people were not lucky enough to escape, and a lot of people kind of died instantly because the ash cloud just flew really quickly, but you would still try and get away anyway. So this is the picture that we're going to focus on for our next learning chunk. So as always, we have got two initiates, and we are going to start by focusing on our adverbs. So adverbs are words that we use to describe verbs, so how you did something. And this is to describe manner. So when we're talking about manner, we're talking about the idea of what they're doing. So these guys are, they're running away. But I want to know how they're running away. So in your fifth box, could you use some adverbs that end in ly to describe how they are running away, please? Some ideas: rapidly, urgently, or frantically. So kind of all those ly words. They give us a really good idea. When you say somebody is running, you're not quite sure, how they're feeling or why they're doing it. If they are frantically running, you can tell they're nervous. You can tell there's something they're running away from. They're not just running their sports day event. So using those adverbs give us context to our writing. Okay, and our last initiate for today is thinking about this checking fantastic, so our hearing. What could they hear while they ran? So we might hear the usual things that we've talked about before, but is there anything different this time that we might hear as they were running away? Can you jot that down in your last box, please? Some ideas? You could hear screams or crying, maybe even dogs barking this time. You might hear rocks hitting the floor, all those kind of things that you might hear because of that volcanic eruption. Our last learning chunk today, we are going to be focusing on using the idea that they are running away and how they're running, and then also all the things that they could hear. I've also added in some speech because why not? Quick, run to the harbour, Tranio shouted urgently. They ran rapidly through the streets towards the harbour. Constantly, the children could hear dogs barking and people's muffled screams as they ran, frantically gasping for air and falling over as the ground trembled threateningly beneath their feet. So I haven't just used my adverbs to talk about how I was running. I have used them for that, but I've also added them in other places to kind of give that context of how the characters are feeling, what they're doing, why they're doing it. I've added in my speech to explain that the characters are going to run to the harbour. So as we've seen in previous pictures, and as we know from our experience day last week, Pompeii is on the harbour. So if you get to the harbour and you get to sea, you might be able to get on a boat. Even if you are in the water, you will not get that lava hitting you. So that's something that people may have done to try and escape. So what I'd like you to do is to tell your reader that the pair have decided to go to the harbour, and then using adverbs describe how the children were running and also what they could hear. Really think about how you can extend and deepen your writing and make it really exciting and interesting to read. This is a bit of a longer section, so I think 10 minutes to focus on this, please, and then come back to me once you've finished your learning chunk. So that was our writing for today with our 3 learning chunks. We're really getting to like the nitty gritty exciting bit now. Although it's devastating, this is where we can use all those amazing ideas that we have, what's happening, the volcanic eruption, and who knows what is going to happen next. So we've got 2 more lessons on this, so Thursday and Friday. So come back tomorrow for Thursday's lesson. Bye guys.